first I thought maybe I'm a crossdresser. I started to associate with crossdressers, and I just wasn't like them. These were men who just, for whatever reason, because of some gender variance, and of course I identify with that, they wanted to dress as women on occasion. They would have girls' night out and have a good time, but the banter was male. It was just a male energy, and that wasn't me.
Hello and welcome to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. We get curious about all things gender, sex and sexuality, as well as relationships, feminism, the inclusive kind, mental health and kink, and all that makes us humans unique and diverse. From body positivity to body dysmorphia, it's all welcome here. If you like what we do and want to make a contribution, you can become a patron on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/50 Shades of Gender or buy us a coffee. Links are on the website. Now, join us on a journey of inclusion, acceptance, and respect. I'm your host, Esther Lemons. I am a cis queer woman, and my pronouns are she and her. In this episode, I have a conversation with Lynn Keiser, a professional in technology and mentor to younger transgender people. Lynn's pronouns are she and her, and she identifies as a transgender woman. Find out what that means to Lynn in this episode. We also talk about how being trans can offer a unique perspective into human psychology, the evolution of relationships and attraction, facets of identity, leaping into the unknown, and doing as much or as little as you need to be happy. It was recorded on the 7th of June 2021. Now let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome. What's your name?
I'm Lynn.
Hi Lynn, and how do you identify?
I identify as a transgender woman. And as I mentioned when I responded to your call for the interview, even though I identify as a transgender woman, I acknowledge my male upbringing, my biological male beginnings, if you will, and the experiences that came with that. But then the different experiences that came with identifying as a transgender woman and then treated socially as a woman. And as I mentioned, it's a very unique viewpoint.
It is.
Privileged in some ways. Being transgender is never easy, but it gave me a view of the world that not too many people get. For example, as a male, I was around other males without women present and saw how they reacted to each other, how they treated each other, and how they talked about women. And then as a woman, I've been around just women without men present and saw how we regard each other and interact without men present and how we talk about men. And the two usually don't meet. You don't see that type of interaction or the casual banter of a single sex from both points of view. But I'm one of the not too many people in the world, as a percentage of people that have gotten to see that. And it's quite fascinating. It's a view into human psychology in a lot of ways.
I'll bet it is. Yeah. What would you say is your main insight from that? Or if you have several, feel free to share that as well.
One of the insights is being among women as a woman and just seeing how, not brutal, but honest women are with each other.
Yeah.
Whereas around men, not so much. Another thing I noticed is women smile to each other.
Right.
You're walking along, and in male mode, women didn't smile. They very seldom, because men are a threat. Men are perceived largely as a threat, potential threat. But women are not perceived as a threat. So women smile to each other. Men don't. Men might grunt or nod or whatever. But women are very open with each other. Sometimes a little too much. I try to stay away from gossip, but
Yeah.
as much as I want to. But that's the openness that women have amongst themselves without men present, is what I really noticed. And I thought that's really cool. And women aren't as demure as the standard stereotype would seem. Very honest and just people, and have their own problems and worries and concerns and frankness of expression that I've found more common among just women than in a mixed group.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Like, especially what you said about the smiling, because for me personally, I think it's, I'm just trying to sort of relate to that or put that in perspective in some way. Because I think a lot of the time if you smile to a man, it can just be taken the wrong way. Even if
Absolutely.
you take
Yeah.
the thread out of it, even on a
Hmm.
mild level, it can
Hmm.
just be interpreted in the wrong way. Like you're just being friendly, and people are like, "Oh, hello," and you're like, "All right, calm down."
Hmm.
It's a bit like that, really. Yeah. Whereas that's very different with women. I mean, that reminds me of a meme I've seen where I think it's a lesbian saying, I'm really actually flirting with people. And even if I'm really direct, and making or giving women a compliment, they're like, oh, thanks, girl. They're all being casual about it. And they're like,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I'm flirting with you. It's like, yeah. So that was quite funny. So how long have you been out as a woman, going through life as a woman?
It's been a very gradual thing.
Mm-hmm.
I told the story many times with the Human Library, for example, but it was when I was young, I knew I was different in some way. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Part of that was wanting to put on my sister's clothes when I was little, look in the mirror and look good, hiding my boy parts when I came out of the bath and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have the words for it. So it's been very gradual. I thought I was a gay man for many years, married a man, still married to a gay man, but it's a platonic relationship at this point. I'd say that when I first knew, it was probably 2010, something like that,
Mm-hmm.
that the dam burst. And the story I tell often is that I was watching a grade C sci-fi movie on TV on a Saturday afternoon. That's when they used to show the not so good sci-fi movies on Saturday afternoons. So it was something I was watching, and there's a pretty actress starring in it. And at one point during the movie, I thought, wow, I wish I looked like her. And I sat
Mm-hmm.
up and thought, oh, wow, what was that about? But prior to that, I was starting to feel a little different. And because I've been living as a gay male, happily married for a number of years, but that label didn't start to fit. So at that point, when I saw the actress in the movie and thought, wow, I wish I looked like her, the dam burst. So at that point, it was very gradual from there. I started out buying little bits of jewelry, little bits of clothing, and I was working from home at that time. Deja vu. And at home during the daytime when my husband was at work, I would put on a little piece of clothing or some clip-on earrings or a bracelet or something. And I felt kind of good about that. I'd have to take them off in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
But that got worse and worse. And one time I just left on a bracelet when my husband came home, a woman's bracelet. And he said, what's that all about? I said, gay man letting out my feminine side. So keep in mind, this was probably 2011 by this time,
Mm-hmm.
10 years or so. And I knew that I wasn't really a gay man. That label just didn't fit anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't say much to him. And he first thing he said, you're going to do this. I'm motioning with scissors for people who are listening in audio,
Mm-hmm.
indicating the surgery. And I said, no, 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 just wearing a bracelet. Well, of course, the surgery did come eventually, but that was several years later. But I would say it was around that time frame, 2010, 2011, that I started thinking of myself as gender variant in some form.
Mm-hmm.
At first, I thought maybe I'm a crossdresser. I started to associate with crossdressers, and I just wasn't like them. These were men who just, for whatever reason, because of some gender variance, and of course I identify with that, they
Mm-hmm.
wanted to dress as women on occasion. They would have girls' night out and have a good time, but the banter was male. It was just a male energy, and that wasn't me.
Oh, how interesting.
So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then there's an old joke I heard around that time. What's the difference between a cross-dresser and a transgender woman? About 2 years. But that isn't really true. I mean, that's kind of a stereotype joke.
Yeah.
But the point is, a lot of people who are trans go through a cross-dressing phase, which I did for a
Mm-hmm.
short while.
Yeah.
So then I talked to my husband after he came home from a trip and told him, I've got gender identity issues. And he was taken quite aback. And
Mm.
he said, I'll stay with you until you transition. Beyond that, I can't guarantee. And I told him, I understand. I pulled a bait and
Mm.
switch on him. I married him as a man, and I couldn't
Mm.
expect him to change his sexual preference. And I told him I'd be heartbroken, but I would understand if you have to leave. And he
Mm-hmm.
never left. We're still together 10 plus years later after
Wow.
that initial discussion.
Wonderful.
And so as I understood myself better, I started going to transgender support groups. I went out with my best friend in Vancouver, Canada, where I was living at the time. And we went out for a girls' day out. The first time I dressed really head to toe in women's clothes, very badly, mind you. But I looked in the full length mirror, just started crying because I knew that
Mm,
was what I needed to do. That's who I needed to be. And I
mm,
knew it wouldn't be easy because being in the LGBT community as a gay male for a number of years, I knew trans women and I saw how they were not regarded well by the rest of the LGB community, I should say,
mm. Yeah.
let alone society at large.
Mm,
I knew it would be a rough road. I knew I would lose people. I was worried I would lose my husband. I was worried about career.
mm,
I was worried about losing friends and family. I
mm.
lost one family member as a result of that, though, as it turns out. One very conservative brother who was sort of almost okay with the gay thing, but not at all with the trans thing.
Mm,
So part time. So I started out part time until 2016. We were living in Canada, emigrated to the US, and emigrated as a gay male couple. I sponsored my husband for permanent residence in the US. I'm a US citizen, but we were living in Canada for a long time because he was not a US citizen.
mm,
So we lived there. And finally, I could sponsor him for permanent residence, a green card, they call it in the US.
mm,
In 2013, so we applied, and he moved down in 2014. And I applied and was working in mail mode when he arrived. But then shortly after that, when we're satisfied that his status was consolidated in the US, then at work, I told my manager and HR that I'm going to transition and live as a woman. My new name will be Lynn. And
mm.
they said, we don't know much about it, but we'll work with you.
Oh, that's
And
great.
that was probably December of 2015, I guess. And 2016, Leap Day 2016, I
Mm.
started working as Lynn. It was kind of a poetic choice of date. A leap into the unknown on Leap Day.
Yeah, I like that.
So I
Yeah.
came in, and if you interrupt me with questions if you want. I mean, I have a whole story here, but if
Mm,
you'd like to ask any questions in the meantime,
mm.
go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. There was one thing that I was thinking of just now. Well, not so much a question, but I just had a conversation on the pod with Helen, a trans woman called Helen,
Okay.
and she was talking about the cost of transitioning, kind of like you were saying earlier, and saying that she had a relatively quote unquote low cost transition because she only lost her father, like because he couldn't, he
Mm.
couldn't comprehend the whole trans thing, and she lost her job, and that was a low cost transition. And it's just insane how much people have to lose and how much is at stake for just being who you are, just living the life like an authentic life, yeah.
There is a lot to lose, and many people do lose a lot. My father was gone by that point. He had died some years before. My
Mm,
mother was still around, and when I told her I was a transgender woman, she said, "I thought you were gay." And I said, "I thought I was too," but she was accepting. My three sisters are very accepting. My one young brother, who's the youngest, was reasonably accepting, pretty
mm,
good. The other brother, who was very conservative, no, I haven't talked to him in years. So
mm,
I lost one brother at work. I mentioned that the my manager and the HR manager were willing to work with me, and in fact, prior to me appearing as Lynn at work, we had an all hands meeting, which we do once a month in the cafeteria at our office. And with my permission, my boss told the group, the assembled group, that about me, that I'll be transitioning to female and be known as Lynn. And I was terrified. I gave him permission to do that because I wanted it. I had to do it. But I was
mm.
terrified about what would happen. Well, people clapped and came up to me and hugged me, and I was crying. And it was just very
Oh,
wonderful and emotional. I'm lucky, though. I
mm,
was able to hold off on transitioning because it didn't really dawn on me that the dam didn't burst until I was well into my middle age and also well established in my career and respected at what I do. I
mm,
had the wherewithal, and I also have the privilege of being able to afford to live in Silicon Valley, which is horribly expensive. And unless you are well established and have a good career, you're not going to be able to live in a place like this. A very accepting, tolerant society, educated people. By and large, it's far safer environment to transition within than many other parts of the country or world.
Mm.
So I realized from the moment I thought about transitioning how privileged I am, how lucky I am to be able to afford to do that. My career was established, didn't lose my job. I lost one family member, but other than that, I didn't lose too much. I didn't lose my spouse. I've seen marriages break. My best friend, the trans woman, her marriage broke because of that. She's found another partner since then, which I'm very happy for her, but nonetheless, it broke her marriage. And
Hmm.
it happens all too often. I'm one of the lucky few, probably, who didn't lose my job, didn't lose my spouse. Our relationship is different. We're
Hmm.
more like brother and sister, I'd say. We still love each other, still consider each other family, still live together, and still legally married.
Hmm.
But it's a different relationship now. But nonetheless, he's still here.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
often count my blessings. I was worried it was going to ruin my career. My husband was as well.
Yeah.
Turns out it didn't. I work for a very large company, and we have a branch office, a research lab in Silicon Valley in California.
Hmm.
And when the CEO or the chairman of the board come out to visit, which they do once in a while, pre-COVID, of course, and post-COVID, I'm sure,
Yeah.
they'll say, "Hi, Lynn, like the chairman of the board of a major corporation." Pretty
Mm.
cool. I get invited to a lot of projects because of engineering expertise. I'm an engineer by background, and
Hmm.
it is nerd central here in Silicon Valley. So that's probably made my career better. I'm more open. I talk 10 times as much as I used to. I know 10 times as many people as I used to because I'm confident. I don't have to hide a major part of myself anymore. And
Hmm.
also, it's been kind of our moment as transgender people to shine in the sun, at least in the US and Western Europe, and a lot of
Hmm.
parts of the world, but unfortunately not enough. But at least we're recognized at this point. And being trans is no longer a reason to get fired, at least in places that I would want to live.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a point, isn't it? It's interesting what you said about your relationship, especially because that makes me think about how, in a way, how attached we all are to our sexuality as a part of our identity. Because
Hmm.
that's sometimes people argue, oh, why did you choose to be gay? Or why did you choose to be, And then it's like, well, did you choose to be hetero? And like,
Yeah.
if you were with someone and they transitioned, would you stay with them, or would you feel like I can't do this? Because that's each to their own. That is valid for each person, obviously.
Mhm.
But it really reinforces the idea that sexual identity is very much an integral part of identity.
It
You know
is.
what I
My
mean?
husband's sexual identity did not change as a result of me transitioning. He still
Mm.
prefers men.
Mm.
I'm
Yeah.
not pulled a bait and switch on him. I've apologized many times over the years, and he said, it's nothing. You didn't have anything to do with it. You couldn't help it. So, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, I still felt bad because he had a settled existence as a gay male couple in mind. And he
Hmm.
had that for many years, but I pulled the rug out from under him. And he cannot, will not, and should not change his sexual identity. I mean, you can't ask someone to do that.
Wow. Yeah, I was just sort of wanting to backtrack about where your story was going because you said you have a whole story that you obviously tell in the human
Yeah,
library a
I
lot.
have a number of stories.
Yeah.
Actually, in when we were still living in Canada, in Vancouver,
Hmm.
and I started to, I'd worn the bracelet and I was wearing earrings and a little bit of women's clothing during the day when my husband was at work. But before I made a full disclosure to him, I told my best friend, Lisa, in Vancouver, and she was perfectly okay with it, very open minded. We were good friends. And my husband went away for a couple of weeks on a trip. And I called Lisa and said, "Let's have a girls' day out on Saturday." She said, "Okay." And so we went. I got dressed head to toe, thought I looked great. And I'm sure in hindsight, if I had a picture of myself then, I would look very bad. But I didn't know how to dress. No one taught me how to dress. But and nonetheless, we went downtown Vancouver and walked around the gift shops and had a great time. Went to lunch, went to grab a bite to eat, and
Hmm.
sat down and ordered. And I had to use the washroom. And so Lisa went over to the ladies' room and peeked her head in and motioned me over. "The coast is clear. You can go in now," which I did.
Mm.
So I was sitting in the stall doing my thing. And meanwhile, several women walk in and using the toilets and talking to each other. I could tell they're standing in front of the mirror, fixing their faces and talking as women do. I didn't know how women regard each other, what they do in the restroom. They talk. They talk, especially, friends do. I was sitting there for probably 10 minutes in that toilet stall, terrified to come out of there until the women went away. And finally, I got out, washed my hands, went back to the table. And Lisa had seen what happened. She saw that she could see the door to the ladies'
Mm.
room. And she was just laughing when I got back to the table. But nothing bad happened. And I used women's rooms with impunity from then on. And nothing bad ever happened. But it was terrifying the first time.
I bet it was, yeah.
Let's see. When early on, I guess I only had a few episodes of being accosted negatively, some negative comments when I was walking around in Vancouver in Canada,
Mm.
which is generally a very tolerant and liberal city.
Mm.
I've actually had worse uh, accostations, if you will, as a gay male couple
Wow,
before
yeah.
I transitioned. We've,
Mm.
my husband and I have been accosted very negatively. I was afraid that we are going to be injured. No, we didn't actually get physically attacked, but I was worried about it. We were discriminated against mostly as a gay male couple because we met in the U.S. He was on a work visa, and I'm a U.S. citizen, and I couldn't sponsor him for permanent residence as a male couple. We couldn't get married, so he had to
Mm.
leave the country. His work visa expired, and that's it. He had to leave. No ifs, ands, or buts. He was not my spouse as far as the United States government was concerned at the time.
Mm.
That was terrible, to not have my relationship recognized. We would have gotten married in a heartbeat had we been able to, and I could have sponsored him for residence if we were an opposite sex couple, but we weren't at the time.
Mm.
Kind of ironic in hindsight, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, that's pretty bad discrimination. We had to leave. So luckily we got admitted to Canada as permanent residents. So we applied and got in because they have a little bit more lenient system or sensible system because we got points for our professional skills and the fact that we're fluent in English, yeah, especially as an American uh,
Mm.
native language, and the experience. And so we both got admitted on the point system to Canada as permanent residents
Mm.
and lived there for 3 years or so, and then got legally married in Canada. Sorry, we applied for citizenship after 3 years, so we're both Canadian citizens in 2002, I guess it was. Then got legally married in Toronto City Hall when we were living there in 2005.
Wow. Yeah, so gay marriage was legal in Canada at the time, but not in the US.
Correct.
Interesting. Yeah. When did it become legal in the US?
2013.
Ah, okay. Wow.
That's
It's
when I applied for his permanent residence, and I had to move down here. We were back to Vancouver by that time, and I applied from Vancouver. So, in order to sponsor him for permanent residence, I had to live in the U.S. and show that I was making a living, show that
mm,
I had a place for him to live. So I had to show my pay stubs, the rental agreement for the apartment that I rented, and that sort of thing. So I
mm,
was flying up to Vancouver roughly every 3 weeks to visit while he was waiting in Canada for his permanent residence, his green card to come through.
mm,
Finally, that came through, and I flew up, and we jumped in our SUV that he'd kept up there. Put the dog in there and a bunch of things. I had a moving truck go ahead of time. But we crossed the border and showed him the, the permanent residence. So they pulled us aside, and we went through a whole interview. The dog had to be kept in the special little room, and our belongings. I think they went through our vehicle. They asked for the keys, make sure we
mm,
weren't bringing contraband in, which is more than the usual visitor gets. But that was kind of
mm.
strange. But nonetheless, at one point they said, "Well, welcome home to my husband," because he was finally a permanent resident in the U.S. He was
Mm.
crying. I very, very seldom have seen him cry, but he had tears in his eyes.
Oh, yeah.
There
Amazing.
we are. And then I pulled the bait and switch, and then transitioned on him a few years later. But that's a different story. He knew that before we moved down here. So it's been an interesting ride. It's made us closer in a lot of ways. The difficulty of immigration, I think, has brought us closer together because we went through it together. And that's
Yeah.
probably why he's with me, is because we have gone through those hard times together.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. If you don't mind me asking about your relationship, if you do, by all means, tell
Sure.
me. Do you have like an open relationship now?
We
Do
do.
you
Yeah.
feel like,
We've
yeah,
given we've given permission to each other to date other people
yeah,
because I want him to be happy and he wants me to be happy. We
hmm,
can't date ourselves. I mean, we do go out and do things together,
hmm,
but not dating.
yeah,
So if you want to, if either of us want to date, and we have done, just dated other people,
hmm,
um, but with the idea and the explicit verbal agreement that we're still a core family.
hmm,
So envision a brother and sister who happen to share an ancestral family home, but they're each dating people, and everyone's welcome to hang out in the house together.
hmm,
So that's what we've ended up doing. I wouldn't call it polyamory exactly, because we
hmm,
don't have a romantic relationship. So our romantic
yeah,
relationships are monogamous, I guess you could say, even though we're still legally married. It's a little bit different dynamic than polyamory.
hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I've been exploring the subject myself,
Hmm.
and it can take so many shapes. Everyone designs it as it suits them,
Yeah.
really, is what I
Hmm.
found. Because, as you know, one of my partners, who you know, Katie John, they are asexual.
Hmm.
So we have not a platonic relationship. They don't like the term platonic. And then I was thinking, I quite like the term queer platonic, which is what I came across. But they're like, no, let's call it post-sexual relationship. And I was like, yeah, fine,
Postsexual. I
let's
hadn't
call
heard
it
that one. That's
call
a
it
new one.
that. Yeah, yeah. So, but it's interesting because I think in society it's often like if you're not having sex, then the relationship is somehow less valid. It's like,
Yeah.
do you find that? Do you? Yeah.
Well, it's a little bit, it's even different than that in my case because we
Okay.
don't consider ourselves to have a romantic relationship. We're
Hmm.
not we're not romantic partners by any shape or mean, just like brother and sister would not be. They might love each other as family members. And we've talked this through in some detail over the years.
Mm.
We consider ourselves family, but not in a relationship.
Hmm.
Even
Hmm.
though we're on paper, we're still legally married and live together and do things together. But it's as family members rather than as romantic partners.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've basically just designed, I don't know, designed as it evolved, I suppose, in a way that
Yeah,
suited you both. Yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the comfort of having a family member with whom you share expenses and the burdens of life is really nice.
Yeah.
It really is. But we have given permission for each other to date because we both deserve, a healthy romantic life too.
Hmm. Hmm. And do you feel your attractions are still the same as they were before you transitioned?
Well, that has shifted a bit too.
Yeah.
Actually, I've only dated one person on a steady basis since transitioning, and that's a woman.
Interesting.
So I
Yeah.
guess I consider myself bisexual now,
Hmm.
and probably always was. In my youth, I had dated women in my 20s,
Hmm.
and the fireworks weren't really there, and switched to men, and the fireworks were there. But I
Yeah.
dated women most recently, and actually associate mostly with lesbians these days.
Mm.
Probably, since COVID is just about over, and at least around here,
Yeah.
I'm starting to open up to dating women again.
Hmm.
Went out with a lesbian group on Thursday evening, and
Yeah.
it was fun. We're going to do more things together as a group, and hopefully find someone to spend a little more time with, one on one.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating because I read an article just recently about how transition can influence the type of people you're attracted to. This
Yeah,
it's a Kinsey scale or something. I don't know if you've heard of that.
yeah, sure. But I
Yeah,
don't even put it on a scale. It's just
yeah,
I realized I am not bounded by a descriptive box
mm-hmm.
anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
yeah,
also, I'm of the age where sex isn't the overwhelming factor, it's companionship.
mm-hmm.
I'm 64, and companionship is more important. But, sex would be nice, but it's really someone to just go out and date, just be on a date and have fun and hold hands and do things with and
Mm-hmm.
enjoy it together.
Yeah,
But as a romantic relationship,
yeah.
if I met a really nice guy, I would.
Of course.
No problem.
Yeah, yeah. Options. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about when you said when you were younger, you always had a sense of something
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess there was not really the language for it.
There wasn't. I'd heard of Christine Jorgensen, I guess it was in the 60s, who was one of the first. Renee Richards was a tennis player who transitioned years and years ago. But those people were objects of mockery and
Mm,
ostracism. And that just wasn't talked about. My feelings, I just didn't, like you say, didn't have the language for them. When I was 6 years old and would try on my sister's clothes and look in the mirror after the bath and hide my boy parts, I didn't know how to talk about that. I thought I was just very weird and would never, ever talk to anyone. I knew inherently that that would be bad if I mentioned that to anyone.
mm,
So not only not having the language for it, but not knowing what it meant and why I did it, and feeling that there was something wrong and dirty and awful about
mm,
those thoughts. So I kept it bottled up. But I was always different than the other boys. I'd learned to adapt, learned to fight and fend for myself so no one picked on me anymore after I fought
mm,
back, and did all the boy things. And then when puberty hit and my blood was coursing with testosterone, it's easier to pretend to be, a male, because
mm,
you're energized with that aggression. It's a very powerful thing. Hormones are. Oops,
mm.
sorry. Sorry about that. I should have silenced that. Sorry. But coursing with testosterone, you kind of put those feelings aside, or I did anyway. And I did have that male aggression and got into fights and did sports and adventures and all that with the boys. And it was regarded well. I didn't have any problem getting picked on because people knew my reputation as being a little bit testy at times. So I was fine. But I was also bright in the advanced classes, the college preparatory class at university prep and all that. So it's kind of a mixed bag of being a bad boy and a nerd in high school. But it's interesting. I didn't have any problems really.
Mhm,
Had friends, and got into university, and I was far too busy in electrical engineering to even think about anything, whether it be sex or dating or gender identity or anything like that.
mm,
Just much too busy, just totally swamped, which is probably a good thing. Then I started
mm,
working as an engineer, and I didn't date women for many years after I was, effectively an adult working professionally. And finally, in my late 20s, I dated women, started dating women for a few years. And as I mentioned, the fireworks weren't there.
mm,
So, eventually, you know the rest of the story. I found my husband. He
mhm.
was the first man I ever dated, still together.
I guess that worked then.
It worked.
Yeah, yeah. So, from where you are now, what is something you want people to know about being trans or about your own experience or
Well, the message I try to give people is that this does not have to and should not ruin your life. Yeah, people may give you a hard time, and you may have to leave the area where you're living, because in different parts of the US, let alone the world, this is accepted to many varying degrees, from really good tolerance and acceptance and beyond tolerance to acceptance and embracement, as in the San Francisco Bay Area, to outright hostility in some rural parts of the Southeast, for example.
Mhm,
And that's not to mention countries where you can be imprisoned or put to death for many LGBT normalities,
mhm,
which I find unacceptable. So you may have to leave. You may lose family. You may lose friends. You may have to change jobs. Be prepared for all that. Prepare yourself. What I try to tell people who are newer at this, younger people especially, this is not an easy road, but if you are willing to put a lot of work into it, more than most other people have to put into their lives, if you're willing to do that, you can do okay.
mhm,
And I don't sugarcoat it for people. It's been rough. It's
mhm,
been a lot of hard work. I've suppressed a lot of myself for many years, and that takes a toll. But
mm,
eventually, it was do or die. And it was transition or commit suicide, is what I'm saying. And that, I think that's the choice that a lot of trans people eventually get to. And I chose to live. And I suggest to other trans people who are newer at this and haven't really figured out what they're going to do, choose to live and figure out what you have to do to make that happen. And I tell them it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to work twice as hard as everyone else. You're going to have to lose people and move away and start fresh somewhere else.
Hmm.
Just expect it. If it doesn't get that bad, consider yourself lucky, but expect it and deal with it as you go along. And just decide to live and do whatever you need to live. And I also tell younger people that based on my own experience, that I can only express what I faced, but I only did as much as I needed to be happy. At first, it was putting on women's clothes. Then I started on low doses of hormones, testosterone blocker and estrogen. And for a while, that was okay. But eventually, I had to transition, that is, live full time as my target gender, which in my case is female. It
Hmm.
could be male for someone or somewhere in between, non binary. But only do as much as you need to do to like yourself. Because
Mm.
that really should be the goal, is to like yourself. If you're not living reasonably authentic, and there are compromises in all cases, and that's just life, that's not
Mm.
particular to trans people. Just accept the compromises that you'll have to make, but get to the point where you like yourself, and then you'll want to live, then you'll make the friends, then you'll continue the career. But work hard so that you're financially ready, be prepared to move and lose people, as I said, and you won't truly understand yourself for probably a long time, if ever. But just deal with yourself, accept yourself as you go along, and that acceptance, that self-image will probably change to some extent as you go along. And accept that and know that going in, and you'll be much better off.
Mm.
So I guess as far as what I want people to know about me is that it was tough at times, but I made it work very consciously, very purposefully made it work
Hmm.
because I wanted to live, first of all. And I also didn't want to be poor or picked on or beat up or
Mm.
kicked out of my home or fired. So I worked to the point where I could live in an area where I would be embraced. And I
Mm.
was lucky enough to be here. Not everyone has the wherewithal or the education. I had the opportunity to get educated, so I did have an unfair advantage. I'm white. I have an unfair advantage for that. Some people don't. Um,
Hmm.
but do the best you can to prepare yourself financially and to move to an area where you will be embraced.
Mm.
And then you'll do much better. You may still have problems, and they may or may not be related to being transgender. People still have myriad problems that have nothing to do with gender identity or sexuality,
Yeah.
health problems, mental problems, whatever it might be. But you'll be better off to deal with those normal, quote unquote, problems if you have gotten to the point where you accept yourself, where you like yourself.
Mm. Yeah, I love that because what I'm hearing, the main thing I'm hearing from what you're saying is just take one step, one small step and take it from there
Yeah,
rather than saying, oh my God, this is the whole process of like transitioning and it's such an overwhelming thing.
yeah,
But just take one step first. Yeah.
yeah. Make up your mind you're going to succeed as a human being, and then do the things that seem right in order to make that happen. It's not
Mm.
easy. It was a lot of work, and it's more work than cisgender straight people, white. What's the most privileged group? Let's say straight cisgender white Christians in the U.S. The most privileged group of all in the world.
Mm.
So you will have to work harder than them, but get to the point where you like yourself.
Yeah. Wow. So, what would you say has been the best part of your journey?
I would say making more friends. I make friends way easier than I used to, for a
Ah.
couple of reasons. I'm more comfortable with myself.
Hmm.
But also, starting on estrogen, I talk 10 times as much. I'm telling you, it's the estrogen. That's powerful stuff. I do. I talk, I have better body language. I can read people better. I can read emotions. I
Hmm.
empathize with people better. I attribute that largely to the estrogen. But
Wow.
the fact that I relate to people better, I like people better. I really
Mm.
like people now. And it's so easy to just start talking to somebody in public, where I wouldn't do that before. So that part I really like. It's just
Mm.
how open I am to talking to people and really enjoy people's company. Well, that's why the pandemic has been especially rough. It might have been easier just to be a crusty old male on testosterone and not have to worry about that, because I'm a very social creature now, much more than I used to be. And
Mm,
especially with the isolation of the pandemic, I realize it even more now. As
mm,
things have started to open up here in California, we're doing really well. And so I've been socializing a lot in person, real life in person.
mm.
It's wonderful. It's just so nice to be able to just smile and hug people and talk to
Yeah.
strangers, and they talk and smile back. And so that's what I like. That's been the
Mhm.
most wonderful. It's a gift, really.
Mm, yeah. How do you feel, or how have you noticed that men respond to you now? You talked about smiling. That's what kind of made me think
Yeah,
about it. Yeah.
yeah. That's with women.
Yeah.
With men, oftentimes, here in California, people are more used to trans people, but
Mm.
men are a little tougher nut to crack.
Mm.
No pun intended. Sorry. Um, but I get mixed feelings and mixed messages from men. Is that sometimes I see that they're a little uncomfortable. I often have to make the approach, to talk to men if I sense that they're uncomfortable, especially if it's a professional setting or somewhere
Mm.
where it's not just in passing on the street, for example.
Mm.
I'll have to make the first move as to start a conversation and put them at ease. And at first, I resented having to do that, but I'd get the confused look of, what do I do? I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. And that
Mm.
hurt my feelings at first. Then after a while, I learned to just walk up to people, mostly men, because women are fine. Just, one of the girls, we don't care. But the men are noticeably uncomfortable. Not negative, but just confused, just like they're walking on eggshells and aren't quite sure what to make of me or how to approach me, if at all. So I'll just go up and start talking to guys. If it's a professional event, which there are a lot of around here, I'll just go up and start asking someone about what they do and what they did over the weekend, and talk about my vacation and whatever it might be. Sports, if a lot of guys are into sports, but some women are too. To not be too stereotypical, but just anything and everything. And after a couple of minutes, I noticed the look, the consternation, the confusion, or the lack of understanding how to approach me just washes away, and then we're just two people talking. I've also had
Mm.
men approach me at professional events and motion me aside and say, "Can I ask you a question, a personal question?" Of course, I know instantly what it's going to be about. It's about being transgender, and they'll
Mm.
ask me how I want to be addressed and maybe a few things about professional life. People generally don't ask about personal things.
Mm. Well, that's good.
But they'll ask about professional life and how it's working out. In some
Mm.
cases, it's because they know somebody who's going through the same thing. But other times, they're generally just curious. Not so much lately. It was more like 5, 6 years ago that I found more of that,
Mm.
because as transgender people, we're much more visible now. So I don't
Mm.
think there are quite as many questions, at least in this area.
Yeah.
So it's men that usually have the tougher time. It was my brother whom did not, and still to this day has not accepted me as a transgender woman.
Yeah. From what you were just saying, I just wondered before, like obviously before you came out,
Mhm.
in maybe banter with other men, or how do you think you would have responded way back when if you'd been faced with a transgender woman, like, and having to interact with them?
It depends when in my life that happened,
Yeah.
because keep in mind I was living as a gay male
Mm.
for many years prior to transitioning.
Mm.
So as a gay male, having been in the LGBT community for a long time, I would have had pretty much no issue dealing with a transgender woman at all, because we're all queer as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
You're just who you are. It's not what you look like on the outside. It's who you are as a
Mm.
person.
Mm.
Prior to that, when I was kind of regarded myself as a straight male, I don't know. I can't say how I was never prejudiced all that much,
Mm.
and with queer people either. In fact, when I was younger, I had a joke, which thinking back was kind of rude, but I was perceived as a straight male dating women at the time. And I joked with my friends one time, the more gay men there are, the better, less competition for me. So,
Yeah.
that it wasn't exactly an acceptance, but it was not a hostility. I wouldn't have not have been hostile to a trans woman, for example. I
Mhm.
might have been walking on eggshells, as I see most straight men do.
Mm.
I'm sure I would have been walking on eggshells and wouldn't be quite sure how to approach someone. But I'm sure that even then I would not have abusive in any way or dismissive because I do appreciate people for themselves.
Mhm.
I'm
Mm.
intellectually curious, and that goes a long way too to accepting people for who they are. Is that
Mhm.
intellectual curiosity?
Yeah.
I probably
Yeah.
would have asked a lot of nosy questions, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for, well, especially men, about interacting with a trans person? Like to maybe set them more at ease, or I don't know, like I liked what you said about people who say, "Can I ask you a question?" And that it's just about, it's not like something invasive or rude, but it's like, how do I speak to you? How do I refer to
Yeah,
you? You know?
yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
There is advice, and I give that to anyone who is not familiar with trans people already, and that is, first of all, ask what pronouns do you use. That's a very simple thing to do. So I
Mm,
suggest that to people. That's something that I advise anyone. Just if you're not sure, ask a trans person. Would much rather you ask them what pronouns they use than to use the wrong one.
mm.
I myself and every trans person I know would much rather that you asked. It's not considered rude, and it
Yeah,
could save some hurt feelings later on. So don't be
true.
afraid to ask. Just if you're not sure, say, "Can you?" Yeah. Now there's a downside to that potentially that you've singled them out as a trans person as opposed to everyone else. But
Mm,
overall, that is a nicer approach to ask what pronouns you use, but also just engage them as people. Ask, "What'd you do? What kind of living, what kind of work do you do, and have you ever been to such and such a place?" And just talk about normal things. We're aside from this one variant, we're just people, as
hmm.
different as everyone else.
Yeah.
So engage in conversation. Don't be afraid. I'm not going to bite anyone. I might smile a little too much and be happy if you talk to me, but
Yeah.
so that's the advice I would give to men. Don't be afraid. I'm just another person just like you. Just
Mm,
ask. If you have a question, ask. I'll tell you if it's a little too personal,
mm.
but normally it's not. Most people are fairly considerate in the questions they ask.
Yeah.
But don't be afraid. We're not going to bite you. I'm not going to stick the politically correct police on you if you do something wrong. So just start talking and, just involve me. Just
Mm,
involve me in things that you do with other people. That's it. That's all I want is to be regarded as one of the gang.
hmm. Hmm.
And you find
Yeah.
that I'm a nice person. You might make a friend out of the deal.
That's something we could all do,
Yeah,
you know, do
it
more of,
is.
really. That's a good thing. Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, this 50 Shades of Gender. How did you start that? What prompted you to start these series of interviews?
Well, some years ago, Katie and I started talking about, or brainstorming. We have a lot of creative ideas.
Hmm.
And it was when the book 50 Shades of Grey was, all the rage. And we talked about why not put a book together with 50 stories of gender diverse people, like on the spectrum of gender. I think at the time I saw it more like almost like a sliding scale between man and woman, I guess, which is now something I see very differently. I see it a lot more three-dimensional now.
Hmm.
But yeah, so we talked about that and we were like, oh, yeah, that would be a good idea. But then we have a lot of ideas. So it just got shelved, in the back of my brain. And a few years ago, I noticed it just making an appearance more and more. And I thought maybe I need to do something with this. So I started by just recording a conversation with a friend of mine who's trans. And it was about an hour long. And then I thought, okay, I can have this transcribed and that will be one chapter of the book. And then I've got 49 to go. So as I did that, I thought, you know what? Why don't I do something with this audio? Because it seems like a waste to just have it sitting there not doing, or not being heard or, stuff like that. And then the idea for the podcast was born. So I then started having a few more conversations, like just a handful. I think I started at the end of 2018. And then in 2019, I had a handful of conversations with other people. Early 2020, a few more. And then I had about 10, of which 8 were definitely usable. And then I thought, okay, let's do this thing. And then before I knew it, I kind of had done an episode. I just recorded an intro and an outro and just put the episode out. And then I thought, oh God, now I need to keep this up, but I've been doing it ever since. And I ran out of the 8 episodes, recorded some more. It was a bit like on a weekly basis. So it was very quick turnaround, and that was a bit stressful. So I'm now a bit better at planning ahead most of the time. And that's just how it's developed. So I kind of took a step at a time with that as well, rather than think, oh my God, I'm going to have a podcast. And then I'm, thinking years ahead and the amount of work and episodes involved. And it can just be really overwhelming. So I just thought, let's just do one. So I did one. And then I was like, okay, let's do some more.
Mm-hmm.
So it just went from there. Yeah.
That's very cool. So
Yeah.
I hope that it turns out to be a good project that educates people. And
Yeah.
I expect, and I'm sure you would agree, that the stories you hear from trans people have certain overlaps in a lot of cases, but mostly they're as different as any two people are.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I find. Even like a trans woman or non-binary, they're all different, all so different. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's because being trans or non-binary or whatever, however you identify, that's only a small piece of who we are as people.
Yeah, it's just one facet of identity, isn't it?
It is, yeah,
Yeah.
because your identity is also shaped by the people you've been with, the experiences you've had, how you were raised, your capability for doing different, an inclination to do different kinds of work, whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, whether you like to travel, uh, things that you enjoy seeing and doing, foods you like, and the entertainment that you seek out. And it's as different as any two people. So there are certain commonalities, as there are among cisgender straight people.
Totally. Yep.
There's some overlap in those regards, but we're all more than three-dimensional, multi-dimensional, if you consider mentality, human beings. And this is a piece of it. It's a piece that's misunderstood widely by the population as a whole, which is why we do the Human Library and you're doing these podcasts, is to educate people that being trans is not we're not misfits as a result of this. It's, just treat us as human beings. A little bit of a difference, maybe. I appear differently than I used to, but other than that, I'm still the same old jerk that I'm just kidding. I'm actually nicer now. Part of that's getting older too. You gain wisdom and mellowness as you age in most cases. But I have the same fears and hopes and dreams and disappointments as any other person, and we're no different as people. So that's the
Yeah.
message I try to get across to both the cisgender audience as well as at large, as well as trans people. We're as different as anyone else is. So you can't take anyone just at surface value.
Don't judge a book by its cover, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the whole library scenario.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for sharing your story, Lynn.
It's my pleasure, Esther. Thanks, and maybe I'll talk to you again another time.
Who knows? Yeah. You can find out more details on the website at 50shadesofgender.com/Lynn, which is LYNN, where you can also read the transcript, and you can find Lynn on Facebook and LinkedIn. Links are in the show notes on the episode page. Thank you for listening to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. You can find us online at 50shadesofgender.com, on social media, and on YouTube. Again, if you'd like to support us, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/50 Shades of Gender or buy us a coffee. Links are on the website. We hope you will listen again. Until then, stay curious and open-minded. How was that for you? Are you happy with what we covered?
I am. You probably could tell that I've told many of those same parts of the story many times, and
Yeah.
both through the Human Library, but also my colleagues have sort of interviewed me. I was actually by the company that I work for. I've arranged a couple of different interviews. I thought it was like transitioning on the job. So I've spoken in public. I've been recorded and published, if you will. And I'm not shy. I'm an extreme extrovert, so it doesn't bother me. I'll talk to anyone, anywhere about anything. And again, that's why the isolation during COVID has been particularly tough. I
Mm.
noticed for my introverted husband, it hasn't been that bad. It's been awful for me. I hate it.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. I mean, I'm an introvert myself, so I'm a bit like, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
you know.
Okay. So maybe intellectually you can extrapolate to that mindset. It's been awful as an extrovert.
Yeah. I do. I feel like I am an empath, so I can empathize with the way it's affected people who are outgoing and really, yeah. Yeah.